Well, the Dutchman Jacobus Arminius went down to Geneva, and he studied down there. Calvin was already dead. But there was a man who succeeded Calvin in the spiritual and political leadership of the city of Geneva, and his name was Beza, B-E-Z-A. Now, in effect, Beza was more predestinarian than Calvin himself. Very, very strong. As Jacobus Arminius sat at his feet and listened, more and more questions came into his mind. And he began to ask questions that were embarrassing to the powers that be at that time, the powers that were. And there were questions like this. If the will is in bondage to the will of God, if God's will is sovereign, if nothing happens except by the will of God, then God is the author of evil. He is ultimately responsible, because even the existence of evil is by the will of God. God wanted it to happen. Furthermore, if Adam and Eve took of the tree, if it was the sovereign will of God and if man had no choice, then the fruit was taken by the will of God. God said, don't do it secretly. Secretly, God wanted them to do it because of the sovereignty of His will. In other words, at that point in the mind of Jacobus Arminius, God became hypocritical. God says, don't do something, yet he, in his mind, says, go ahead and do it. Go ahead and do it. And he began to say to himself, the God of Calvinism is hypocritical. He says one thing and means something else. Furthermore, he went on from there. Now here is where we're getting down to the current issues in Adventism. And what I'm doing right here, I'm laying a foundation for you. I'm not handing you folk out any pat answers. I want you to know where we are. And I want you to know where you are. Because I'm telling you folk that unless you get your roots down, you will lose. And I'm a judgment-bound being. And all of you are judgment-bound creatures. And I'm responsible for you on the judgment day. It is a serious thing when I walk out on this platform. Because I am responsible to you. And I'm going to tell you you're going to have to get your roots down. And some of you are breezing along on television, thinking you're going to walk into the pearly gates. I have news for you. Unless you get busy to guarantee your own salvation, you won't make it. And don't say I didn't tell you. I'm handing out a solid, loving warning. I'm begging you, seek the Lord Jesus while He may be found. Call upon Him while He is near. Now, Arminius saw that if everything was by the sovereignty of the will of God, then God really wanted Adam and Eve to eat of the tree because that was ultimately His desire. But then came up the question of the judgment. And here we're at a critical point in our discussion. God said, I should say Jacobus Arminius asked of God, God, how can you take me to judgment on that great day and say you did wrong, if when I did wrong I was only doing what you wanted me to do? How many of you following me? You get my point? Well, he said, how can there ever be a judgment day? How can God vindicate Himself in the judgment day if all of the people who did wrong were only doing the will of God anyway? That God said, don't do it, but secretly I want you to do it. So Arminius came to the conclusion there could never be a judgment day except within a free will. That God would be guilty in His own court. That God Himself would be hypocritical. I was in the home of a loyal follower with the Calvinist persuasion, a man in the state of Washington. And I sat in his home and I reasoned with him about the freedom of the will That God, if He had sovereign will and gave us no latitude to make a choice, that God is responsible for the devil, God is ultimately responsible for death because that is His will, God is responsible for all evil. And then I said to him, after I had saw that I was getting nowhere, I wanted to shake him up a little bit, and I said to him, your God says, whosoever will may come, but He knows full well they can't. I said to him, I could never love your God because your God is a hypocrite. Shook him up. So within the system of Calvinism, there can never be a judgment because everybody is only doing the will of God, be that good or be that evil. Now, where are we as Seventh-day Adventists? We believe in the freedom of the human will. We believe in the absolute freedom of the human will. We believe that a man is free to choose to serve God. Whosoever will may come. Let him that heareth say, come. And the Spirit and the bride say, come. We believe that we are free to accept salvation. And we believe that we are free, after we have accepted salvation, that we are free to walk out, if that's our choice. Now let me run this by again. In total Calvinism, you have no freedom at all. You're either saved or lost regardless of what you do or what you choose. A modified form of Calvinism, as we see within the Baptist Church, you are free to accept salvation, but after you have accepted salvation, you can't be lost. But an Adventist says, and this is Arminian teaching, and our logic demands that we come there, that we are free to make a choice, to come in, and the door is open if we want to walk out. We believe in the freedom of the will, both before and after the act of redemption. Clear? Are we all clear on that? All right? That's where we are. When we turn and read in the book of Revelation, to him that overcometh, I will grant to sit with me on my throne. Him that overcometh. To him that overcometh shall eat of the tree of life, which is in the midst of the paradise of God. There is an overcoming to be done. To him that overcometh, I will not blot out his name. Oh. You can have your name in the book. You can have it blotted out. Hold fast that which thou hast, lest what? Any man take thy crown. Oh, you can't lose your crown. Oh, but you can. Otherwise the statement means nothing. Now, I don't have time to give you a study today on the perseverance of the saints. But it is on the issue of the perseverance of the saints and the freedom of the will that Desmond Ford has gone astray. So let me make a final conclusion to this segment of what I'm saying. That if the saints are locked into salvation at the cross, then it is obvious that the judgment makes no sense at all. It's all finalized. It was finished and finalized at the cross. The idea of a future judgment is totally meaningless. Now I'd like to take perhaps maybe I should give you another little sidelight here. And that is, there are three groups of Christians in American theology that are Arminian Christians, meaning we believe in the total freedom of the will at all times, both before and after salvation. And these are Methodists, Nazarenes, Seventh-day Adventists, and a little handful of people called Free Will Baptists. Now,